Good morning. Welcome to church this morning. My name is Laurel and I'm one of the pastors here at MAC. If you call MAC home, we would love to see you join our Facebook group, our Morden Alliance Church Facebook group. This is a place where you can connect with other people from our church and share exciting announcements going on with your family. You can share prayer requests there as well, things like births and engagements and all those things to help you stay connected with what's going on with people who call MAC home. So we'd love to see you join that group. Emma is going to read our scripture with us now.
I'll be reading from Psalms 86. Bend down, O Lord, and hear my prayer. Answer me, for I need your help. Protect me, for I am devoted to you. Save me, for I serve you and trust you. You are my God. Be merciful to me, O Lord, for I am calling on you constantly. Give me happiness, O Lord, for I give myself to you. O Lord, you are so good, so ready to forgive, so full of unfailing love for all who ask for your help. Listen closely to my prayer, O Lord. Hear my urgent cry. I will call to you whenever I'm in trouble, and you will answer me. No pagan God is like you, O Lord. None can do what you do. All the nations you made will come and bow before you, Lord. They will praise your holy name, for you are great and perform wonderful deeds. You alone are God. Teach me your ways, O Lord, that I may live according to your truth. Grant me purity of heart, so that I may honor you with all my heart. I will praise you, O Lord my God. I will give glory to your name forever, for your love for me is very great. You have rescued me from the depths of death. O God, insolent people rise up against me. A violent gang is trying to kill me. You mean nothing to them. But you, O Lord, are a God of compassion and mercy, slow to get angry and filled with unfailing love and faithfulness. Look down and have mercy on me. Give your strength to your servant. Save me, the son of your servant. Send me a sign of your favor, then those who hate me will be put to shame. For you, O Lord, help and comfort me.
Come speak your truth, Lord, your truth I see. I'll trust your words, not what I see. Grant me your blessing,
Jesus, you are mercy. Jesus, you are justice. Jesus, you are worthy. That is what you are. You died alone to save me. You rose so you could raise me. You did this all to make me a chosen child of God. Worthy is the Lamb that once was slain to receive all glory, power, and praise. For with your blood you purchased us for God. Jesus, you are worthy. That is what you are. Jesus, you are mercy. Jesus, you are justice. Jesus, you are worthy. That is what you are. You died alone to save me. You rose so you could raise me. You did this all to make me a chosen child of God. Worthy is the Lamb that once was slain to receive all glory, power, and praise. For with your blood you purchased us for God. Jesus, you are worthy. That is what you are. Perfect sacrifice, crushed by God for us, bearing in your hurt all that I deserve, misjudged for my misdeeds, suffered silently, the only guiltless man in all of history. Worthy is the Lamb that once was slain to receive all glory, power, and praise. For with your blood you purchased us for God. Jesus, you are worthy. That is what you are. Jesus, you are worthy. That is what you are. Justice and mercy, justice and mercy, justice and mercy. On the cross, justice and mercy, justice and mercy, justice and mercy. On the cross, justice and mercy, justice and mercy, justice and mercy. On the cross, justice and mercy, justice and mercy, justice and mercy. On the cross, justice and mercy, justice and mercy, justice and mercy. On the cross, justice and mercy, justice and mercy, justice and mercy. On the cross.
We are entering into a time of prayer together right now, and we want you to be able to do this at home, either on your own or with the people you're watching with this morning. There's going to be a prompt on the screen. You can follow along and use it as a guide for what to pray for this morning.
of sadness from wherever you've been. Come broken-hearted, the rescue begin. Come find your mercy, O sinner, come near. Earth has no sorrow that heaven can't heal. Earth has no sorrow that heaven can't heal. So lay down your burdens, lay down your shame. All who are broken, lift up your face. Oh, wanderer, come home. You're not too far. So lay down your hurt, lay down your heart. Come as you are. There's hope for the hopeless and all those who stray. Come sit at the table, come taste the grace. There's rest for the weary, a rest that endures. Earth has no sorrow that heaven can't cure. So lay down your burdens, lay down your shame. All who are broken, lift up your face. Oh, wanderer, come home. You're not too far. So lay down your hurt, lay down your heart. Come as you are. Come as you are. Fall in his arms. Come as you are. There's joy for the morning, oh sinner, be still. Earth has no sorrow that heaven can't heal. And earth has no sorrow that heaven can't heal. So lay down your burdens, lay down your shame. All who are broken, lift up your face. Oh, wanderer, come home. You're not too far. So lay down your hurt, lay down your heart. Come as you are. Come as you are. Come as you are. Come as you are.
Well, hey, welcome here. We're on week 3 of our series on Mark. We got to explore some really fun topics near the end of last year. We did things like going back to the basis of what the Bible is, as well as explore Advent a little bit. But I really love the chance to go through a book or a chunk of scripture and really dig into it. So I'm really excited to get to talk to you wherever you're watching this at. This is a lot of fun. I spent every summer since I was 14 until I was 22 working at Bible camp. I love the community that gets formed among the staff. I love how fast trust can build between campers and their cabin leaders. I love how stupid, the stupid games and inside jokes that form up. I especially love the stories that come from our interactions with children. There was one time I was a cabin leader for this group of 7-year-old boys, and my co-leader had a strategy where when it came time for bed, as a bedtime story, he would read the Chronicles of Narnia to them, like the whole novel. The idea would be that they would just read to them up until they were all asleep, so we wouldn't have to deal with all the convincing them to settle down and go to bed. And this was a pretty good idea until about 20 minutes in, one of our kids got really upset that the story just never seemed to end. There was another time I was hanging out with some of my campers. They were a little bit older this time, and one of them looked at me and said, Hey, Graham, you kind of look like Channing Tatum. And I was like super flattered and so grateful and thanked him so much. And then another kid piped up and said, No, you're not thinking of him. You're thinking of Jonah Hill, who played his partner in the movie. And if you're not familiar, this is what Channing Tatum looks like, and this is Jonah Hill, who played his partner in that film. Semblance is a little bit there. During my time at camp, I had this one guy I worked with, and on the first night, he gathered all of his boys in his cabin together and tell them that when it came to being at camp, he only had 2 rules. The first was to show respect, and the second was no talking after lights out. Now, you need to understand that before we could work at camp, we had to go through a week-long training process in which we learned all of the ins and outs of how to make camp function. We were given a whole manual how to make these things work. And my friend was able to boil the whole thing down to 2 things: respect each other and don't talk after lights out, which essentially is just another way to respect people. But I want you guys to think about your context, whether it's at school or work or at home. Likely these places have a ton of different rules and restrictions that you need to abide by. But if you were to boil it down to one central or maybe a couple of central ideas, what would they be? Maybe you thought about that question, you had a really hard time shaving it down just to one thing, because we can get really in our head about rules. And the idea of rules can be good. I know a handful of our teenagers are working on or have just gotten their driver's license the past few months, and in order for them to get them, they had to learn all of the rules about the road. And that's good, because a mistake in that area can be life-threatening, or at the very least, really expensive. And there are other places in our lives where rules dictate how we operate, but they don't like super matter. Like if we were to play Uno and you were to tell me to draw 2 cards that were played on top of each other means I have to draw 4. Like I wouldn't agree with you, but I won't fight over it because honestly, who cares? And I'm also like not entirely sure what Bulk Barn's policy was pre-pandemic on sampling food, but it probably, or hopefully, it probably doesn't matter a ton. And I bring all this up not to say that rules are dumb or pointless, because they're not always. But I wonder if sometimes we get so in our heads about following the rules, whether it's a game or whatever it is, that we sometimes miss the whole point. I'll pass the question off to you. What is the silliest or weirdest rule that you've ever heard of or had to follow? Last week, Stafford left us off in the middle of Mark 2, and he talked about some run-ins Jesus and his disciples had with a group of Pharisees. And this continues on to the few passages we're going to talk about today. Starting in chapter 2, verses 18 to 22, we read this. It says, "Once, when John's disciples and the Pharisees were fasting, some people came to Jesus and asked, 'Why don't your disciples fast like John's disciples and the Pharisees do?' Jesus replied, 'Do wedding guests fast while celebrating with the groom? Of course not. They can't fast while the groom is with them. But someday the groom will be taken away from them, and then they will fast. Besides, who would patch old clothing with new cloth? For the new patch would shrink and rip away the old cloth, leaving even a bigger tear than before. And no one puts new wine into old wineskins, for wine would burst the wineskins, and the wine and the skins would both be lost. New wine calls for old wineskins.'" So in verse 18, there are two groups of people that are fasting. There's John's disciples, and then there's the Pharisees. And John's disciples are pretty self-explanatory. They were people who were learning under John the Baptist. And this is only really one of the couple times that we really hear about this group of people in Mark's gospel. But it's the Pharisees that I want to pay a bit more attention to today, because I would guess if your church experience is a little bit like mine, it's where we talk about a lot about Pharisees. We see them as this antagonistic people that in a lot of evangelical circles, we, and for good reason, talk about them really harshly as people not to be like. But I would probably guess that a lot of us don't actually know a ton about them and their history. And in case any of you are worried, today won't be like a 40-minute history lesson. We'll just hit the highlights on them. But I think it's really important to understand some of the context here, because I believe it'll help us appreciate this text a little bit better. So while we don't know the exact origin of the Pharisees, they were for sure present in what was called the Maccabean Revolt, which happened in 168 BC. So we know for sure that they existed about 2 centuries before Jesus was on earth. This was an event in which a group of Jewish people known as the Maccabees pushed back against the cultural influences that were threatening their way of life and preserving their own identity. And that kind of set the tone for their whole existence as Pharisees. They weren't directly a political group. They were a group that emerged out of the Jewish people who were seeing their culture threatened by people like the Greeks and the Romans, and they really wanted to preserve the tradition of their people. They stood for the Torah above all else. That's like the first 5 books of the Old Testament for us. And because of their place in society as the gatekeepers of its tradition, they were often seen to have the final word on matters pertaining to the Torah and how to interpret it. That was the intention of these people, but by the time Jesus showed up, this group became more or less the cultural police, and it became less and less about preserving Jewish culture and tradition, but rather preserving their own power in the society that they were in. We can see it right here in verse 18. If we read it carefully, it was John's disciples and the Pharisees that were fasting, but it wasn't either of these groups that approached Jesus about why they weren't fasting. It was just, it says just some people. It speaks to the power and influence the Pharisees had in this culture, where a group of normal, everyday Jews could look at what the Pharisees were doing, and it didn't match up with Jesus and his disciples, and that led to questions. And then we following in verse 19, we see Jesus respond, comparing this instance with a wedding celebration. And again, we need to unpack some cultural baggage here in order to understand the full story. Weddings in Jesus' day were parties that went on for several days, and for the friends and the guests who were invited, they had no other responsibility other than to just have the best time possible. Even the rabbis, the Jewish version of pastors, they weren't expected to follow the Torah to a T during the celebration. These weddings likely had more wine than any Winkler wedding combined. They had a ton of food and music and dancing. Basically, fasting would be the last thing on anybody's mind in these situations. Jesus is saying that his presence is a cause for celebration. But this tone changes in verse 20, where the disciples' celebration won't last forever because the groom will be taken away from them. Because in a normal wedding situation, the celebration would go on, and it happens until the guests eventually leave and the bride and groom can continue their life together. Whereas here, Jesus is describing a situation where in the middle of the party, the groom is forcibly removed right in the middle of it. And Jesus is saying that he's saying this, it tells us two things. First, Jesus knows what will happen to him eventually on the cross. He knows it'll happen. Second thing he's telling us is that it says that the appropriate time for disciples to fast is right now, the time that we're living in right now, as we wait for Jesus to return. Maybe you remember back in the summer where we talked about the Sermon on the Mount, and when we came to talk about fasting, we talked about how it's important discipline for us, for those of us who consider ourselves Christians, to learn, as it's an expression of the strength that we find in Jesus rather than earthly things. The Jewish people were so caught up in the expectations and rules that came for waiting for the Messiah to come, they missed that the one they were waiting for, the point of everything that they were doing, was sitting right in front of them. It's the same way with us that when we get so locked in our routines and religious expectations, we can miss the whole point as to why we do them in the first place. Because we can get so maybe locked up in the black and white of religiosity that we don't see the gray that Jesus has called us to live into. Jesus ends this short exchange with two short parables in verses 21 and 22. First, he talks about how a new patch of old clothing will leave an even bigger tear, and putting new wine in old wineskins would cause them to burst. What Jesus is saying with both of these is that he's comparing him into entering into Judaism, a new way entering into an old way. And what's important to understand is that these things don't function together. Jesus and his new way don't work with the Jewish system that was set in place at the time. Because Jesus brought mercy, whereas a religious system brought compliance. For us today, this means that Jesus isn't something that we can just tack on to our already existing lives and habits. Having Jesus enter into our life means that he'll bring in something totally new and completely exciting for us. Our old ways aren't compatible with the ways of Jesus. This idea is pushed further in this following passage. Starting in verse 23, we read this. One Sabbath day, as Jesus was walking through some grain fields, his disciples began breaking off the heads of grain to eat. But the Pharisees said to Jesus, "Look, why are they breaking the law by harvesting grain on the Sabbath?" Jesus said to them, "Have you ever read in the scriptures what David did when he was and his companions were hungry? He went into the house of God during the days of when Abiathar was high priest and broke the law by eating the sacred loaves of bread, and only the priests are allowed to eat. Then he also gave some to his companions. Then Jesus said to him, 'The Sabbath was made to meet the needs of the people, not meet the requirements of the Sabbath. So the Son of Man is Lord, even over the Sabbath.'" The Sabbath was something that was incredibly important to the Jews, as it was one of their most defining practices that separated them from other cultures. For them, the Sabbath was a symbol of the covenant the Jews had with God as being his people. In the eyes of the Pharisees, Jesus is going against something that was against the core of their identity, which we talked about earlier, was a really big deal for them. And I don't really say this so you feel bad for them, but just to understand that their perspective a little bit better. Jesus responds by referencing a moment that we can read for ourselves that's found in 1 Samuel 21, where King David, the same guy who killed Goliath, he had eaten consecrated bread as an exception when he and his men were starving. But Jesus isn't referencing this moment as a way to plead exception, but rather as a way of saying that David's actions here set a precedent. In making this the allusion to David, who the people in Jesus' time knew as a great king, he's aligning himself with a higher authority. This passage includes with two verses that Jesus spends explaining what people's relationship with the Sabbath should be. That being, people aren't created to uphold the Sabbath rules. The Sabbath was incorporated in order to bless humanity and enhance it. People don't work for the Sabbath works for them. There's this well-known author and speaker, his name is Simon Sinek, and in 2017 he wrote a book called Find Your Why. Essentially, the premise of the book is to always make sure that you always have a reason behind why you do the things that you do. And doing this helps people recognize the areas of their life or their job that don't contain any real meaning and are really just doing it for the sake of getting things done or just because that's the way it's always been done. Jesus is employing a similar thought process here to challenge the Pharisees. He's reminding them of why it is the Sabbath exists in the first place. It's meant to bring rest to the Jewish people for all of their labor, It's not to add stress. And just like the wineskins and old clothing we saw in the previous passage, Jesus is using this moment to push back against the black and white rules that the religious leaders have created at the time and show how a new way, the new way that he brought in doesn't match with the system at the time. Jesus isn't for rules. He's not for systems. He's not for structures. Jesus is for people. He's for you. Now, I say this knowing full well that us as a church has rules and systems and structures, and you're participating in one right now if you think about it. This service went live on Sunday morning, as it always has, and you're likely experiencing some singing and some prayer, and based on the church's history, a white person who probably has a beard talk about the Bible for 20-ish minutes. In the fall of last year, when we were able to meet with our students, we ran a program. That program had a schedule, and we also had some expectations of how we asked our students to behave within that program. And you might be able to make the argument that we're wrong for having these kind of things as part of us based on Jesus' words here. But we hope the heart behind these rules that we make are for people. We run a Sunday morning service not just because that's the way it's commonly been done, but it's a time a lot of us are able to join. And we ask our teenagers to respect their small group leaders, not because they're all power hungry, but because they have the teenagers' best interests in mind. Rules, Jesus is saying here, are only good if they serve people, not the other way around. And there's one last passage I want to look at this morning, and this is the beginning of chapter 3. And though all three of these passages that we are looking at this morning, they have the same central theme, I feel like, and I believe, but this final scenario Mark writes about, I think, really drives the point home. Jesus went to the synagogue again and noticed a man with a deformed hand. Since it was the Sabbath, Jesus' enemies watched him closely. If he healed the man's hand, they planned to accuse him of working on the Sabbath. Jesus said to the man with the deformed hand, "Come and stand in front of everyone." Then he turned to his critics and asked, "Does the law permit good deeds on the Sabbath, or is it a day for doing evil? Is it a day to save life or destroy it?" But they wouldn't answer him. He looked around at them angrily, and he was deeply saddened by their hard hearts. Then he said to the man, "Hold out your hand." So the man held out his hand, and it was restored. At once the Pharisees went away and met with the supporters of Herod to plot how to kill Jesus. So again, we're faced with an issue where Jesus is going against the Sabbath rules at the time, like we saw in the previous passages. And as we can see in verse 2, they were already waiting for it to happen. They were looking for something to accuse Jesus of. Everyone was aware of the issue this man had. However, based on the Sabbath rule, they were only allowed to care for him if their illness was life-threatening. Jesus sees this man and orders him to stand up in front of everyone. And we can bet that this man is feeling the same way some of us might feel if we got caught passing a note in class and the teacher decided to read the note in front of everyone. Like, not only does he have to deal with the potential embarrassment of being called out, but is also worried that he'll be exposed. This man decides to do it anyway, and Jesus asks, does the law permit good deeds on the Sabbath, or is it a day for doing evil? Is this a day to save life or destroy it? And this is the same moral question Jesus brings up in the previous passage. What Jesus is implying is that when we see a need to be met, we cannot be neutral and stand by to allow it to continue. There are places here in our town that are often the butt of jokes because of how sketchy or dirty they might be. But the reality is that there are real people who are being abused and not treated justly. And this behavior is able to continue because the people who are aware of these issues choose to remain silent. The test of all theology and all morality is either passed or failed by one's response to the weakest and defenseless members of society. And quite frankly, if your version of Christianity allows you to see a need in our world and not feel the desire to make sure that need is met, you need to throw it away and start over again. And that might sound harsh, but it doesn't seem like Jesus is that impressed with the people who are around him who are being silent when they see someone in need right in front of them. When Jesus finds no one would answer him, Mark says that he's not only angry about this, but he's sad. This is because, just like we talked about, the greatest enemy to divine love, justice, and mercy isn't opposition or bitterness. It's hardness of heart or indifference to it. And we might not think about it, but it's not just the religious leaders who are silent, it's Jesus' own disciples. Those closest to him have nothing to say on this matter either. Despite all of this, Jesus turns to this man and commands him to stretch out his hand. This man who, unlike anyone else in this room, he took that step of faith and stretched out his hand. And what happened when this man took the chance of trusting Jesus to make wrong things right? He experienced healing and he experienced restoration. And I wish I could say that everyone who witnessed this immediately surrendered to Jesus and committed their lives to following him, but unfortunately that isn't what happens. Instead, the Pharisees, seeing their power threatened by Jesus' continual acts of mercy, head out and plot to kill him. In all three of these stories, while they deal with different people, different traditions, and different circumstances, what we see Jesus model for us time and time again is when we see our structures and our rules conflict with our love for people, people need to win out every single time. Again, rules aren't necessarily bad, but they need to exist in order to serve people, not the other way around. Maybe you need to reflect on some of the beliefs and laws that you live by personally. Maybe get out a piece of paper and write them all down, and then ask the question, like, how do these principles allow me to show love and mercy to those around me? Maybe you need to look at your finances, and you see what you're spending your money on, and ask the question if my money is being spent the best way it could to meet the needs of those in your community. Maybe over this time you've been reminded of some systemic issues in our community and our world today, and because they're left unchecked, it allows for vulnerable people to be taken advantage of. And while you might not alone be able to take a whole system down yourself, you need to reflect on some ways in which you can play a role by seeing mercy play out, by making people aware of these issues, or bring it to the attention of someone who does have the power to change those things, or by refusing to participate in them until the circumstances change. In fact, hey, let's do this right now. Talk to each other right now about how you can show those around you love and mercy with what you have. So we're not going to get it 100% right all the time. But for those of us who claim to love and follow Jesus, we have the responsibility to try. Last winter, when we were able to meet new people, I was having a conversation with someone, and when it came to the topic of what I did for a living, the tone automatically shifted and being actually a little bit hostile. What happened was this person started assuming that and accusing me for being someone who was against this group or had a problem with this idea, or because of me, I was the reason why this issue wasn't changing. And while, sure, these assumptions were a little bit hurtful, it more so showed that when it came to people who identified as Christians, for them, that was a signal of the things that I was against. And maybe you've had a similar experience, or maybe you're someone who feels that way right now, and honestly, I don't blame you. But until we get around to meeting the needs of the vulnerable, showing mercy in as many opportunities we can, and we need to prioritize people over the rules, we'll never be the kind of people who are known for what we're for rather than what we're against. The world will continue to see the church as being a place full of judgment and hypocrisy as long as we continue to be judgmental and hypocritical. So if you forget everything else I've said today and you just want to remember this, I want you to remember this one last thing. I want you to hear this. While you continue to learn what it means to have your life reflect the love and mercy of Jesus, Jesus has love and mercy on you. And like the man with the deformed hand, when we take that leap of faith to expose our weakness to him, he's loving and merciful to heal and restore our brokenness. And imagine what would happen if we became a church that was marked by our love and service to those around us. To people, it might be a little confusing at first, but this would change the game for the church as a whole in Morden. We won't be known as people who demand for our own rights and freedoms, but by being people who are merciful to others and fighting for their justice. When you get to tell someone you're a Christian, it won't be met with awkwardness. It would be met with excitement, because they'll know that you're for them, and ultimately they'll know that Jesus is for them. We won't be able to change the hearts of people. Only Jesus can do that. But we'll look a lot more like him as we go about our days. Hey, thank you so much for taking the time with us this morning. We hope to see you very again soon.
Thanks for watching with us this morning. We want to remind you, if you are wanting to give financially to the church, you can do so through the Giving tab at the church website, mortonalliance.ca. It lists all the ways you can give there. Also on the Church Center app, you can give directly through the app, and we have more information about things coming up on the app soon. We want to see your faces, so if you want to tag us on your socials at Morton Alliance, we would love to see you. You can check in there and say hello. Thanks for watching. I hope you have a great week.